Okay. Okay, so we're talking about the Jewish Community Foundation of South Carolina, which is a very vibrant and vital community, growing community, who is looking to see what we need to be in 20 years, what we need to be able to have the money to do in 20 years, not knowing what it'll look like in 20 years. Might want to presuppose that, especially, and essentially making it regenerative. So that we have through some nodal interventions as well as emergency funding, we are able to do that. And it occurs to me going out of the context that we're talking about a process for which we have a um, story of place essentially done. We kind of know what we're doing. We have stakeholders involved, and trying to come up with a process to set regeneration in motion, perhaps. That might be one way of looking at it. I mean, we talk a lot about the story of place part. We talk a lot about, workshops and stakeholders and things like that. But I haven't seen so much discussion of how, especially, trying to regenerate a place, repair a place, things of that sort. But this is, folks that want to go beyond where we are right now. And I've been I'm facilitating that process and trying to find what I've been calling in terms that make sense to the people, a needs assessment, but a needs assessment that talks about a 20-year horizon, not what is needed today. Because there may be things that are needed today that are just legacy thinking. We've always done that, so shouldn't we continue to do it? And may not be supporting, or actually might be counterproductive to the types of opportunities that may exist to assure that they're going to be there in 20 years. Um, it's so much. I've seen so much of it. Like I call it, we're trying to impose 1950s thinking on 2025, because that's it's, or maybe I could even say for my generation, say 1970s thinking to 2025, not only being assured that the people who are going to be ultimately leading the efforts 20 years from now, will not relate at all to a mindset that was developed before there was an internet, for instance, or many other things that we have. And I'm a bit stuck as to exactly how to go. And there may be uh, a framework that might, or frameworks that might be helpful in how to think about the future. And or it's quite possible I'm asking the wrong questions. I had suggested what some of the areas to fracture the whole into to if we wanted to use that kind of um, degenerative methodology, but how to think of it. So I will leave it there and see what's coming up for each of you, and where we can see what might happen. Thank you.
Thanks. You might have mentioned this, but just so I can make it really concrete, is there like uh you're kind of doing the needs assessment or like that process now? Is there like meetings related to it? Like how is it actually looking and gonna play out in terms of like how you're working
Um,
with the people or like where you're at within that process?
sure. The the idea, well, the community has approximately $200,000 every year available to make grants. Um, and they have um, kind of put RFPs out saying tell us what you think you'd like to do with some money. And as long as you're a charity, 501(c)(3), and no conflicts of interest, things of that sort, and tell us what you think you'd like to do. And of course, that's limited to what each of those agencies So if you're an agency that is bringing, Meals on Wheels, for instance, to people elderly at home, you're going to talk about what is needed for supportive seniors or people who are handicapped that are homebound. And the scary part is, you're only going to get the proposals for the people that you ask because they know what their mission is. And you're not going to get, you know, there may be needs out there that you don't know about to ask them to ask for a proposal. Or there may be some people who don't have, the grant making ability in-house. And so, they aren't going to get the full consideration that someone who does proposals all the time will. And so we haven't done a needs assessment, but the question is how to do a needs assessment that isn't blinded by what is existing today. And so I have a stakeholders group that is trying to develop this process. And it's easy to develop the RFP and the process and make it visible and make sure you're educating your grant, the grant application people who write the applications so that you level the playing field and and find out who can be working together. And there's all kinds of neat things to do. But the hard part and the part that's up front is how do you do a needs assessment for 20 years from now? How to, or what do you make the, a needs assessment that will make the community regenerative, rather than just go from one do good to the next do good. Does that answer, Bryce, where we're at? If it was easy, I wouldn't have brought it up, right?
Wait, so you're in the process of developing the responding to the RFP and like
No,
creating
we're
a response?
responsible. We're
Or you
responsible
got
for
money?
figuring out how to take $200,000 a
Yeah.
year and put it so that we have a regenerative community.
Yeah. Okay.
And
Like,
and
how do
so
you
writing an
impact
RFP is
it?
easy, right? The process, because ultimately, when you are going to look at all these applications, you want to look them through the lens of what's going to be regenerative, you know. Um, and of course, you have an opportunity to have the people who are asking for the grants to look at themselves regeneratively, look at themselves strategically. What is this program that you have? What's it going to do in the long run? Who are your stakeholders? All the great questions that we would come up with. Um, and so it's a marvelous, $200,000 and gets a lot of attention, right? And we know that if this is a very successful grant making process, the reward or curse is the fact that we will get more money. People will say, I thought that I should just put my money because this is one institution I love or something of that sort, but you are looking at the right questions. And so rather than designating my donor advised fund or my family foundation to, institutions I've always supported, I want you to have that money and decide where that money would be best for the overall community. The third line of work is to make people think about that third line, when they're donating, and in which case if we have the credibility and the transparency that will ultimately make us a more effective and not to the other part of it is, maybe we'll throw that in, is the idea of thinking about investing in the community beyond money. If it's a problem, I'm going to send you a check. All right. Well, we want people to become so invested, the donors to get into the process so that they will decide, yeah, I want to be on the board of that. I'm going to give money, but I want to be on their board, with the expectation that the more they understand what a recipient of the funds are going to be, they're going to want to invest more into that, especially if they're part of the group that's deciding where the money is going. And also, even if they aren't up for boards, there's a possibility of volunteers, or consultants. Somebody who may offer legal expertise, as in addition to being a very good donor. So it's taking investment beyond. Let me write a check. Let me send money from my donor advised fund that I've already written off my taxes on. Which
Just for
again,
clarification, And sorry if I missed this, but what's your role
I'm the facilitator
of,
of the committee that's figuring out how is ultimately going to come up with a process
ah,
to give the money away in a way that makes that sense.
So would you characterize this as a planning process, like a long-term planning process?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, it is an immediate need. We have,
Right,
um,
right. Obviously, you
yeah, I mean,
want
the money's
long-term planning
there,
to inform the immediate need. But
right? And we have, it's got to go out in, the RFPs have to be issued in March. The annual RFPs have to be issued in March, so it's not
right,
it's probably going to be an ongoing process. But and I've done a similar thing up in central Pennsylvania where I spend my summers.
right.
And working with them as well, which is interesting because it's a whole different story of place, which is best definitely informing what I'm doing with them differently. But Charleston has South Carolina is a growing community. All the people, I think it's one of the fastest growing states in the country right now, where you know people of a certain age or a certain background are coming to enjoy what life is here.
So the thing that I'm drawn to is this notion of, a 20-year horizon and trying to plan for that. And so what comes up for me in that is you're imaging an end state, right? Or a future state, right? And then working on, well, what does that look like? And working at the level of maybe beliefs, philosophies, and principles. And then, so for me, and maybe because that's what I do, I turn everything into a design, a design process. But so this feels like a design process, right? And the way we generally try and start those is imaging the potential of what we could be doing together. And in this case, right, that's imaging what does this look like in 20 years? Um, Working at the level of beliefs, philosophies, principles, developing a set of goals relative to that image of that end state. And now you've got like you've got direction and you've got something to shoot for. And then the process then is how do you design interim states of evolution to get you there? So, I mean, that's what I'm seeing like holistically in terms of process. And to what you were just saying before about, not just about money. Um, so the language that we would put that in, right, is how do we develop the capacity and capability of these kind of right charitable endeavors to evolve to the point where maybe the money isn't needed or right how do we build capacity and capability right to feed the evolution that creates more capacity and capability and so on and so forth. So in
Yeah,
terms of like an overall process, and if this is like a planning process, and I realize you got to crank out an RFP and you got to
yes.
right do the everyday stuff, but I think you almost have to create something out there that you're designing to in order to inform what you do in the interim. So that's what's
But
coming up.
and I think I'm familiar with the process. Obviously, we've talked it many times. And but what's
Right.
where I'm tripping up or maybe
Right.
even overthinking it is I want to, we're the financial capital, right? In the five capital framework. And that has a certain amount of power because we can't do it. But we are not necessarily the ones to do a needs assessment. And we can certainly do an RFP for a needs assessment. But it reminds me when we talk about, what do you do about the stakeholders that don't have a word? And then what do you do about the stakeholders that they're 10-year-old kids right now,
Right.
right?
mhm,
And we want to have a system in place
yeah,
that recognizes that. I realize that, there are lots of legacy institutions, as there are in any religion or government or civic organization. And what you really need to do is bring in, find a way to make sure that those stakeholders are coming in and deciding how that money is going to be used in a way that increases capacity without saying, oh, we're not, we're not reducing, the pollution in a river, or, setting up, a plan to add 200,000 units of housing in 10 years or anything of that sort, that we can envision what it looks like. We don't know what it is. And I'm afraid if we make those types of decisions, then we are, propagating a community that is stuck with, the 2025 vision of the world, and missing out.
Yeah.
I mean, so many people are not engaged right now, or doing their own thing, because the institutions aren't meaningful to them, and we're missing them.
No, and I think I just wanted to add now that what really comes up for me quite strongly is, maybe I think about this a little bit differently, and maybe it's my long background in brand. But I think maybe like almost what you're describing yourself as being a brand. So you stand for something, but in an open container kind of way. So I just wonder if you worked quite diligently with the scope of consciousness, where you, like Marcus was saying, and just really focusing, if you make it really clear what the principles are that you support, what the values are that you hold, and that's the invitation that you bring out. And so that way it's still an open-ended container, but it's like almost like a brand manifesto, in the sense of, this is your defined principles that you call in. So if people support the same principles, and that's like in the spirit of something, where you define these sentences that really make it clear what kind of futures you have agreed on, what are that shared belief system, but still making it so open-ended that whatever outcome is not yet described, because that's what the 10-year-old is now thinking about. But it's like, it's a very clearly it's like a list of invitations, almost defined as beliefs and values and principles, and that's what would call them in, and that's where the scope of consciousness would come in.
Very interesting. I mean, so what I think I hear you saying is asking for grant applications that align with the beliefs and the principles, rather than any specific,
Yeah.
how we're going to help people who are homebound.
Yeah. That,
One,
yeah.
I was just gonna say, one tension I feel like, because I'm working on a project with a foundation that gives grants, but it's like, how can you set it up in a way so you're co-developing the end state, rather than it's like, we as the funders know what is best for the community and we know what should be funded, and like kind of like reinforcing that like power hierarchy
Mm.
and trying to make it
Exactly.
like more co-develop. I don't know if that makes sense at all.
Yeah, it's the, we kind of joke about people who leave foundations like they leave their wills, and, I will, only give our money to our children if they, get graduate degrees, or they, marry someone from a certain faith, or, they agree to take over the family business for 20 years or something. So from beyond the grave, they exert control. And, we want, and I think that's what you're saying. We want to make sure that's not happening. And hopefully we can raise that consciousness about, let's not control, what's happening. You don't want to do any more than any of us would want to, a generation before us have said that, we, I guess it was kind of a joke on podcasts, is um, could you ever have an investment fund that promises not to invest in anyone that's doing AI?
Mm-hmm.
Because many people hate AI right now for what it is, but is that really something? I don't think that will make sense in 10 years. It's like, we don't want to invest in anyone who uses cell phones, or will have Zoom meetings, because, what Zoom meetings are terrible, right?
I'm still not fond of these either.
Yeah. But, that type of thing. But I really like the suggestion of looking at RFP as meeting beliefs, and philosophies as opposed to certain targets or certain areas.
So that
Do you have like are you working as a team in a sense of where you can actually start to work through the scope of consciousness and try to find that alignment within you? Like, is there,
Yeah,
ha-
there's a core team. I did share in the email. I
yeah.
eventually didn't have a chance to see it.
Oh,
We've come up
sorry.
with a
Yeah.
purpose statement,
Right.
which is pretty powerful, using the method I learned from Marcus as to what word should be in your in the purpose statement, and then coming up with something that hits the you know uh, action, will, and being, function, will, and being. So I think that was very successful. Um,
But
yeah,
that's great. So you're already doing that work. So
yeah. I mean,
you're
that's
pushing
I
it
know how to do
further.
that.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
It's how to look at the future without
Yeah.
even wanting to
so
say what the future should be.
Yeah.
you mentioned a needs assessment, right? And so one of the things that's coming up for me is if you had an assessment of the current needs, right? Trying to project needs in 20 years, I'm not sure how you do that.
No.
But if you had a current needs assessment, right? And then there could be maybe it's part of the money gets dedicated to a somewhat different RFP. And that RFP is directed at the needs. And the RFP is asking for endeavors that build the capacity and capability of people to eliminate those needs or to minimize those needs, or right? To address those needs in indirect ways, right? That enable them to be less of a need in the future, right? And trying to look at it that way. But I
Mm.
think you almost have to maybe people already know what the current needs are, and you could start from that without a needs assessment. I don't know, but
Hmm.
if you can identify what the needs are, then I don't know, maybe there's a path forward there to building capacity and capability.
Yeah. And that spurs a different thought. Is an RFP that says, how can we give you money to assess these needs so that you don't need to ask us for money again? Right. If the if it's a Meals on Wheels program that needs money, so how can we give you money so that you develop a Meals on Wheels program that regenerates itself? That gets the money in. Um, and so that makes them to think about how stop giving me fish,
Right. It's the old
teach me how to fish,
give people food versus growing food versus right.
Yeah, right.
Do you have resources in terms of storytelling and really clarifying these things? I mean, since you've done like your purpose statements and all that, because I just feel like if you can really clarify what you stand for, then people will resonate. They will be able to understand, okay, this is where we're at. This is what we can help build on. This is what we are changing. This is the some of these big grants out there are very open-ended in the wording and in the representation of similar type of projects, but still keeping it vague enough so that, oh, I can apply for this because it's still, it's very clear what they stand for. And then therefore you will be able to attract interesting projects. So it was just a question around like the storytelling, if you're
Oh
doing
yeah,
something with it. Yeah,
we're doing a lot of that.
good. Yeah.
In fact, I you know decided last week that I really need to meet all these people one-on-one. It's great to have groups come together and as a core team or in workshops, but I really need to sit with everybody personally just to understand, get an input that they just can't possibly, do for the 3-minute snippet and
Yeah.
a few times in a meeting.
Yeah,
Yeah,
because
storytelling is very, very important for this group.
yeah. So okay, I just want to finish by saying it's like
I'm
what's
sorry.
the energy field that you're creating? Like, and it's like what is that then attracting? What are you emitting and what do you hope to attract? So that it's just the consciousness around what that
Yeah,
is.
it's going very well. It's just quite amazing. And some of the people have known each other for years, and some have never been a part of a process. And you know, the whole concept of evolution has really ignited this group.
Yeah.
Is, you know, just that we don't want a system that can't evolve. You know, we have to say, you know, it's you know, someone said, you know, we should put a sunset on this process that in 5 years it goes away, and we have to come up with a new process because this process may not be the right process. You know, and whether we do that or not, I don't know, but we'll see how that goes. But it's just wonderful watching people just think about how things are going to evolve, and just to make sure that the system can evolve, and that we just haven't done the same thing that we haven't been happy with what was done to us 20 years ago, and with some of the sources of funds that are overly restrictive because that was made sense 20 years ago, and it may have been enlightened 20 years ago, but it isn't anymore. I'm still, go ahead, Christina, please.
Josh, is the needs assessment something that the funder requests for you to do? It's expected or no?
No, I should say, unfortunately not.
Mm.
They said, here's the
Because-
money, this is where I want it to go. You know, figure out who's the best one to get it.
Because the needs assessment sometimes, usually how it's done in service, when you conduct it and you're done, then it becomes past and frozen and it has no meaning anymore. So just be careful with that.
Yeah,
No,
it's kind of
it becomes a thing, not it's not alive.
it's the same trap as strategic planning.
Yeah.
You do it once a year or once every 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I mean, that was one transition I've done is uh, I did, you know, I did strategic planning without calling it strategic planning. You know, as to what's the vision, you know, and envisioning the future, and everyone, you know, could talk about what they saw, what, you know, what they'd like to see, not realizing they were doing strategic planning and doing it on an ongoing basis, asking that question several times a year. You know, what are you envisioning now? What's changed? What has this changed in your vision? So it's an alive opportunity rather than something on a shelf. And I think that's all from, you know, aligning with regenerative practice as opposed to, you know, doing good. Still stumbling with how to bring in those people who have no voice because we don't even know who they are now. I mean, we can't bring in the people who will be out 20 years from now. We just have to make sure they have a way of responding to this when it's their time. But you know, how to bring in you know, the people who might be creating activities on their own, you know, that very much align with institutions but don't want to deal with the politics of the institutions that they might have, whether if it's a religious, you know, people who are meeting to do prayer services on their own, or prayer services outside in nature, because, you know, no institution would ever want to do that, right? And to make sure that we're picking them up, because they are probably going to be the people who are leading in 20 years if they're establishing those things right now. Anything?
I was just thinking, yeah, I mean, Christina, and what she was getting to is like kind of around the idea of like essence and potential. As you think, I don't know, like instead of like needs in 20 years, like what's the potential? You know, like kind of maybe like kind of thinking about it through those lens makes it more alive.
Miguel, you're looking thoughtful. Anything coming up for you on this?
So needs and assessment.
Right.
So assessment, as you all were saying, it's it creates a snapshot of something in time. So I was thinking, how can you reflect a more dynamic nature of that
Yeah.
measurement or indication or whatever? Um, on the needs part, I'm biased because I have, pushed back on both sides of the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and so I carry that luggage. So when you say needs versus wants versus desires, and what are those needs trying to fulfill, and what is your role in that fulfillment? So that opens up some things, like when you were saying, well, if you identify, let's say, a need for food, so are you trying to then engage people in farming? Are you trying to engage people in cooking? Are you trying to engage people in getting food donations? What is all those things could, in theory, be applicable, but that opens up, I mean, a whole bunch of options. So if you're trying to put that into an RFP, it gets complicated because yeah, it's too broad. And when the RFPs are too broad, then you don't get good responses generally. So that's what I was thinking.
It's the balance between not being too broad and too limited, right?
Well, or go the other way. I think that the RFIs are more helpful because then you can receive proposals from all over the place, and that's okay because you're not trying to get people to put a number on it yet. You're just trying to see who's stepping in and volunteering a methodology to address that need, which I think it's of more value versus trying to confine. So you're opening versus confining, and then when with the open, then you can reconcile later instead of having to deal with the confinement.
You know, what's coming up for me from what you said is, rather than talking about how we get food to homebound people, is the question is how do we serve homebound people? Because there will be people who will always end up being homebound, and hopefully homebound rather than in an institution. I think that's I would say that would be a belief, fundamental
Correct.
belief.
So
Right.
I'll push on that
Okay, please.
specifically. So you're saying, so you're trying to get the food to them. What if instead of getting the food to them, you get them to the food? So you are meeting social interaction needs with the food with any other activity that you can do. So instead of driving the food around, you drive them
Right.
around to a place where they can then be their needs can be addressed.
That's wonderful.
Josh,
Thank you. Yes.
public health has a cool name for instead of homebound people is aging in place. How we create,
Right.
homes as
Some of them though are handicapped that are young.
but even
Yeah.
so, yeah.
Okay. Well, but I
How
think
do you work that for a person who is handicapped? But
I think to Miguel's point that I'm getting from that is that that's still too limited. Is that we have people who are in a certain situation. How do we address those needs without presupposing that it's bringing food to them?
Yeah, it's more systemic is what I'm hearing
Yeah.
Miguel
Yeah.
say, right? How do you meet many needs instead of just
Mhm.
food in the belly, right? And
Yeah.
I think it ties in somewhat to what Bryce was saying about like inviting organizations in to co-create how you do this. And this RFI that Miguel is bringing in, right, is maybe a way to identify who wants to be brought in to have those co-creative conversations then.
Wonderful. Carrie.
Um, I guess I'm So I got here late, sorry, but so I went back and looked over your email just so I could orient myself a little bit. And so I want to just invite us back to essence connection. And if the process is really aimed, I wasn't sure if you're trying to do the best you can within a system that's not going to allow a regenerative process, or if you're actually aiming for one. But if you're actually aiming for one, then, I think what I'm seeing, like when I see or hear about, getting food to elders or keeping elders healthy and involved, it sounds fragmenting, honestly. So I'm like, what does fooding look like through all the life phases, right? What does fooding look like when, what did I hear recently? We're all only momentarily able. That, most of us, that's the minority group, we all have a chance of joining. And so, what does eldering look like? Like, I think now that I'm entering into that phase, I wish I would have lived in a community that was actively talking about what eldering looked like all through my life. Like when I was a teen, when I was a kid, it's something we see implicitly. But you have to be kind of astute to swim against what ageism tells you. And I'm particularly interested in the essence to essence part of what does it mean to be a Jewish community asking these questions in these places and connecting essence to essence. So, I feel like if you want to be regenerative, my question is like, what do you need to develop in yourself and your core team to be absolutely rigorous about not letting the usual ways of doing things become what guides everything, because that we're going to swim upstream in that all the time. I think that's what's alive for me, and I think that's what we're all up against. It's a question I'm asking for myself all the time. People expect me to deliver answers, and that's what they're used to paying for. When I say no, we're not doing that, then they can't figure out why they should be here.
Carrie, you bring a good topic that, so I've come across a bunch of millionaires and billionaires that they're having a hard time coping with eldering. So they're just, dumping millions and millions to do whatever they can to, not elder, so stay where they are. And it's interesting because recognizing that our stint here is limited, instead of spending so much time and effort in trying to prolong it, instead of being present. So yeah, there is a lot of ageism and all that, and we see it represented in the movies and in the media and everywhere, that people are set to pasture, which also brought something other. There's a island in the Pacific called Tikopia, where there was a ritual that people went on a canoe, and they went to explore the vastness of the ocean when it was the time. So there's that also. But so yeah, different groups adopt different rituals, and I think that, going back to what you're saying, that's what does the eldering culture look like, and what would an evolved version look like? So what is the status, totems, rituals and taboos for that culture?
And I know we're focusing, because I use an example of homebound people. But I mean, you could still have the same conversation about education of youth.
Right. And I think what I'm speaking to, having run a nonprofit and done a ton of do good work, is that whole thing of beneficiaries is very different than how do we develop the capability and capacity of each individual to be self-determining of what aging, what aging looks like, and to really be, agentic about developing the systems that support eldering, right? Like that's actually, we all have a stake in that if we have the privilege. And we're just using that example because it's one that popped up and it was one that was here. And I was like, but I think it's true for any of them. How are we connecting people to the essence of place and community enough that they have this, fire to develop themselves, to express their essence as they connect to place and develop place. And
If I could offer a trial balloon to shoot down, how would you view a grant application that asked, how would you use the money to increase the capability and capacity of the people that you're serving? And answer that question. And not even, I mean, whether it's a group that focuses on senior or education or sports or anything in the community. Does that kind of guide people to come up with an answer that doesn't presuppose what the solution is? Or is there a better way of
and I
asking
missed
that
the part.
question?
Are you the grant generating? Are you going to be soliciting grants? Are you asking me as a person who will be writing the grant? Like, because I missed that first part. I'm sorry.
We have right now $200,000 a year to give away
Gotcha.
for good things. And, rather than just ask people, what would you do with money and, convince us
Right.
to give us your money, we want to make sure that we're doing something that's making the community regenerative.
Right. Okay.
Rather than just, plugging holes here and there, or,
Right.
sometimes we've become a line item in everybody's budget,
Right.
we're gonna get
So,
$20,000 from this foundation, and
so let me spin that backwards.
please.
So what if instead of, distributing the money directly, you work with a community bank or any other financial organization, so you have a stake funding to lower access to funding, and you are participant in that process by taking applications for community development projects from interested parties. So you're helping them gain access to funding at a discount, so they can then implement regenerative projects. It's amplifying the reach of the money by injecting third-party capital and just using your 200 as seed.
Yeah, that is part of the expectation, is that we not only are going to give out that money, but we are going to find partners, other foundations that are involved.
I think
Leveraging other money is what
Yeah,
you're talking.
I was talking about private capital, not foundations only. So people with deeper pockets than foundations. That's what I was getting at.
Right. Yeah, and that's part of it as well. Yes, is that it's to say, especially if you know someone who might be interested in a certain area, you say, well, they have a need that's for 50,000, and we'd like to give 25 from our foundation, and we'd like you, as someone who's interested in this area, Mr. Gates, to give us the other $25,000.
Oh, so you're matchmaking. Got it.
I mean, that's the ultimate goal. You're right, is that, and that we hopefully have the of people in place that can help identify those opportunities to increase capacity.
I'd like to
So
share, go ahead.
I just real quick wanted to, because this brings up the totally ironic thing about any community foundation is they have an endowment that they invest in the stock market outside of their community, right? And then the proceeds come back, and then that's all they invest
Mhm.
in their community. So this notion of actually investing your endowment within your community instead of sent, right? That's the irony of community foundations. And I have no idea how to address that, but it's been, I mean, I've been working with the York County Community Foundation locally here for over 30 years, and it's just the idea is just so ironic to me. But yeah,
Yeah,
So-
Well,
good
and
with it, but
Go
yeah,
ahead, Tammy.
there's a metric of money bouncing within, so you can track that money, how many
Oh.
times it loops around within that community, and that's a way to
the economic multiplier.
Mhm.
correct.
But
How many
let's
times?
not forget, like when in TRP, literally when our project was a farm that was owned by some bajillionaires who wanted to do everything regen, and they were literally like, from our analysis over the time, like these people giving the money were they're like all of us, right? Like on the developmental edge, they weren't investing in their thinking about how to think regeneratively. And
Mm,
they were actually the problem. So, when I think about what does real investment look like, as we know,
right.
you could spend 20 years developing people to think regeneratively and we'd still be toddlers. So my thing, from, for example, living with this indigenous family, it's like they can't compete against the marketplace.
Right.
And to actually put the money in developing a region's ability to think in place, to think regeneratively, to look at multiple forms of capital, that I think is what is actually going to shift over the long term. What does it look like? Like I think this whole thing of like, where is the nodal intervention in the community? And once you know story of place and what the nodal intervention is, that if we develop our capabilities for micro enterprises around this, and then the ancillary businesses, because everyone's been along for the ride. It hasn't been just the micropreneurs who can put up the money or the funders who are learning everything, but the community is coming along and somebody's paying for that. That's the thing nobody's going to pay for. See what I'm saying? But if everybody's coming along for the ride and learning, and you put money and you put community, like for here, for example, in Ithaca, we should be shifting to a nut-based economy. But it shouldn't just be a few people starting farms and starting mills, because we need people who are like, I'm going to buy this bread even while the recipe sucks. And I'm going to give you feedback until you get it right, because I'm invested long term, right? Like there has to be that. And then from that, there's other ancillary economies, because people have learned how to balance, regeneration against, current funding and marketplace realities and whatnot. But that's the thing that nobody wants to pay for. And that's the most important investment we can make, is that whole thing of like that developmental ongoing container that's open to everybody around place sourcing. And I mean, for me, it's always about livelihoods, because you can't live in a place if you can't, sadly, in this economy, earn a living. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Interesting. I've been pushing that as well on separate from this whole grant making and social investing of foundation money, and the community secular or non-secular community found in Harrisburg offers a opportunity based on, I guess, ESG numbers to invest in in funds that are doing good in the world, rather than the fact that big oil gives you the best return or something of that sort. And for the millions of dollars they have, and this is, people who have foundations and have the control about where it's going to be invested. Only $150,000 has been invested in this fund that someone like me probably embarrassed them to start up. And I was working with a foundation that does green work, and the fact that we're making money on people who are not promoting environmental justice and ecological practices, we're getting better returns, so we can put it in to go up against people who are, doing the exact things we don't want them to be doing. So, and that's the fragmentation, isn't it? Is that we're not thinking about it as a system. It's like, so I'm stuck in the grant making lane right now, which I think has an opportunity to, I guess, vertical integration, would you call it, where we, go back and talk about what we do with the money, and how we solicit the money and all those other things. And of course, another nice part of this process is to go back, and once you give the money, to go back and talk to the people who received it and see how they're using it and how we can help them use it better. So that's another opportunity. I guess we're coming to the end. Any final reflections? This has been very helpful to get me out of my, how do we get food to people in houses type of question. So I really appreciate that. And I think that going on, asking questions that are essentially how you going to increase capacity and capabilities, to the point at least that you don't need to ask for this money anymore. It's probably a more regenerative approach, without presupposing what that vision might be for 20 years. But I thank you for that. Any other reflections in the last few minutes?
The thing that's coming up for me in this latter part of this conversation is really getting clear on what that greater whole is.
Mm-hmm.
What's the greater whole that's being served, right? And so when you do a needs assessment, right, you're identifying problems to solve, right?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, how do you bring in like the big picture and systemic effects and nodal interventions that lead to systemic effects, right? It's how do you identify those kind of things?
Thank you. All right. Well, everyone have a great weekend. I understand there's an opening next week, right?
I believe there's an opening going forward. I
Yes.
don't know that anybody's signed up. So yeah, please sign up if there's something you want to bring. And just real quick, for those of you who couldn't make it, we had 18 people show up on Wednesday for the first session of Becoming Regenerative. So,
Including your mom.
about probably more than half were new folks, new to the idea. So went pretty well. I thought it went pretty well. Karen was there. Maybe
It
she
was
can-
great. It was
Yeah.
great. I mean, and I'm saying that measured from the aliveness at the end of the session. Also, I'm using as the indicator of that.
And it'll be interesting to see if any of them come again without Debbie Clark leaning on them, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
I already saw the video. I was the first one who saw the video.
All right.
I connected with a couple of people outside and they were like, can't wait to come back. So,
Yeah, I had about 6 of them reach out to me on LinkedIn to connect. So
Wonderful.
Yeah, I'm so bummed I missed it. When is the next one?
December
1st. Oh, no, sorry.
Oh,
Eight,
on my
No.
birthday?
No,
8th,
that's not true. 8th.
Oh, okay.
8th or 9th or
Great.
something like that.
Yeah, early
Because
December.
then I'd miss the next one, because the 1st is my birthday.
It's
Okay,
whatever
the
the
8th.
Wednesday is. I think it's like the 8th or the 9th or something like that.
It's
Great.
December 10th,
10, thank you.
Okay.
10th Wednesday.
Okay, thank you all again.
All right.
Thank you, Josh, for bringing this.
Thanks for bringing it,
So
Josh.
Yeah, thanks,
Okay.
Josh. Good luck.